Coming up, UGA tries to grab the top spot in recruiting while Alabama hopes for a strong close as well. We'll talk about them and the rest of the SEC coming up next, right here on SEC Country Live. Hello and welcome to SEC Country Live. My name is Brandon Adams. This is the former Alabama All-American Mike Johnson getting ready for National Signing Day coming up tomorrow. And, you know, I said this on my morning show, Dog Nation Daily, this morning, that, you know, sometimes you'd say, oh, it's like Christmas Eve, you know, the day before the big day. But it sort of doesn't really feel that way as much anymore. I made the comparison. It's almost like that gift you get in the mail from your distant aunt like a month after Christmas. That's sort of what National Signing Day feels like tomorrow. I mean, does it lose any of its luster given the fact that so many of the big name programs have filled out most of their class? Big name prospects, at least a large portion of them, have already signed? I think it's dulled down a little bit, but I think the guys you have left, and there's still some quality players obviously still out there on the board, I feel like those guys might have some fireworks in store. You know what I mean? Like, I'm quietly optimistic about what we might see or might not see tomorrow when it comes down to some of these kids' decisions. Yeah, there's no doubt about it. There's still going to be plenty of interest, plenty of fireworks. That's the name of the game here in the SEC. We'll still see plenty of that. We'll kind of follow all of that over the course of the next 60 minutes here together today, including item number 1 on our SEC Country Line First and 10 list. You know, we always talk about the big news around the SEC. I think the big news here today is the potential that Georgia could have the nation's #1 class. Now, it was ranked that way after December. There's been some movement since then, and obviously Kirby Smart, on the heels of what Georgia did back in December, knew there was still going to be plenty of work to do before February. He foreshadowed back a couple of months ago what's been happening the last couple of weeks here. Here's Georgia coach Kirby Smart.
There's still spots left, and I think you're always recruiting. I mean, we're going to be trying to recruit the rest of the spots, and there's going to be some really probably intense battles come January because the guys that are left are targeted by all the top programs. So there's going to be some guys out there that we still go after. So it's not like you can say, okay, relax, we're done, because that's not the case. We got work to do in recruiting.
So Georgia knew it had work to do, but it also knew there'd be work going on around the Dogs. Ohio State's tried to fill its class out. You know, other programs have tried to build up its class, and now Georgia probably needs to add a couple of guys to really make sure that it does maintain that #1 ranking or retake it, depending on which recruiting service you sort of care about the most. Jeff Sintel from DogNation.com, who covers UGA recruiting every day, laid it out this morning of kind of what's still out there for the Dogs. Here's Jeff.
Everybody do what they do, and Georgia would just close with Tyson Campbell, Otis Reese, and Quay Walker, and it doesn't matter what the Buckeyes do. Georgia's still going to put up a number higher than that score.
Michael Collins says Tyson Campbell, the Dogs, y'all know it. In other words, that's what Michael thinks Georgia needs that #1 class. That's also one of the names that Jeff mentions there. Yep. So we can talk about these names, the guys that Georgia might add, but, you know, I'm going to tell you that as a fan, being #1 is a really cool thing to me. I think it also matters a lot, too. How much do you think being #1 as opposed to being in the top 3, how much do you think that does matter? How much do you think it should matter?
I just don't put as much stock into it as other people. I look at what Georgia's class is, and it's special. I don't think there's any other way to slice it. When you look at the talent, especially at the top they've gotten, I mean, you're already at 6 5-stars. You could push for a 7th 5-star when it comes to Tyson Campbell. If they don't finish ahead of Ohio State by 309 to 311 or whatever these composite rankings come to, it's not gonna take down what I feel about the Georgia class. It's been a special class from top to bottom. You've gotten guys to flip, you've gotten guys to sign on the dotted line, you've got an incredible amount of talent that is going to serve Georgia's football team for years to come. So if Ohio State jumps up by 1 spot because they added an extra 3-star guy at the end, it's not going to change the way I look at any of these classes that fall underneath.
I think there's a big difference between, like, say, #3 and #8. I mean, when you put yourself in the top 3, you're putting yourself in the position where Alabama has been, where Ohio State's been a lot, where, you know, even teams like Florida State, which won the national championship in 2013, kind of a fixture typically in the top 3. I think there's something about being in the top 3. Once you're in the top 3, does it matter too much if you're 1, 2, or 3? Maybe it doesn't. But from a fan's perspective, and that's the perspective that I do the show from every day, what's cool about being #1 is it's just really hard to achieve. I mean, let's face it. Alabama's been #1 every year since 2010. I mean, #1's sort of this hard thing to wrest away from an Alabama. And if it wasn't Alabama, Ohio State would have been number one more often than not in a lot of these years. So beating these type of premier programs, that's sort of a hard thing to accomplish. So from that standpoint, I think there is some pride on the faces of some Georgia fans here, just given the fact that it's not an easy thing to pull off.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it also gives you something to point back to the next recruiting cycle. You say, man, well, we got a ton of talent last year. You might want to jump on board with us right now. I mean, we had the number 2, number 1 recruiting class last year.
It creates its own momentum.
Right, and I think that is kind of, to me, that's that top 3 bubble, the top 5 bubble, that it's hard to get into some of those groups because, and you mentioned it, there's a big difference between 3 and 8, and there's a big difference between 1 and 11. There's a big difference between some of these signing classes, but I don't want to fall into the trap of saying, man, that number 1 class, if Georgia comes in at number 2, it's still a historically good class for me. I just feel like the names they've signed and the talent they've signed at positions of need, particularly up front on the offensive line, to me, that spells a lot of trouble for everybody else trying to climb into Kirby Smart's seat.
All right, I'll give you some Georgia hate here from our comment section. Greg Steele, who's a Florida fan, says to Georgia, just be happy at number 2 again. In other words, a reference to being number 2 on the field for 2017, maybe number 2 in recruiting for 2018. Although I'm not so sure about that. I think that Georgia probably is going to get that number 1 ranking. Yeah. But some Florida fans feeling pretty good about themselves. We'll talk Florida later on. They're feeling at least good enough about their close to recruiting to talk a little trash to the dogs here.
Well, I mean, I don't know what shocks you about that. We get the Georgia, Florida talk all the time on here. And Florida, listen, I still think, and we've gone back and forth about this for the last 2 weeks. I still think Florida has a big day in store tomorrow. I think they're going to get some prospects that it's not going to be number 1, number 2, number 3, but Florida's going to open some eyes tomorrow with Dan Mullen.
Frank Crowder says Reese, Bush, and Campbell are dogs. The Bush there is Tommy Bush. Jeff Sintel a moment ago talked about Otis Reese, Tyson Campbell, and Quay Walker. You think Georgia can close with all 3 of those guys? Walker right now is an Alabama commit, although nobody thinks he's going to go there. Reese is a Michigan commit. People are suspect about that. Campbell's been kind of wide open, visited Miami most recently at the end of the weekend. Could Georgia possibly get all 3 of those guys?
They definitely could. And to me, and listen, when I talk about Quay Walker, and Jacob Copeland goes kind of in the same thing, I just don't know, man. They've left so many people guessing for the last few weeks, and they've done, they've had visits, and these guys have really enjoyed the recruiting process. And I think obviously Quay Walker, he was a Bama commit, still is, a soft Bama commit, and he's looked at Tennessee, he's looked at Georgia. You add in the J.J. Peterson factor, you add in all these different factors, and I just don't know. I just don't know where the guy's going to end up. I just don't think it's going to be at Alabama. I don't know if it's Georgia or if it's Tennessee. I definitely think, in my opinion, Tyson Campbell lands at Georgia. I don't think there's any question about that in my mind. I know that a lot of Bama fans think he's making a late push. I think he winds up at Georgia. I think Otis Reese probably winds up at Georgia. Quay Walker to me still has me asking a ton of questions.
Spoon Hall, who's also a Florida fan, says about Georgia's potential number 1 ranking, still won't make a difference. UGA is going to be trash come next season. Then I got 4 Gator emojis. So the Florida fans out in full force already today. Let's change the subject here to item number 2 on our SEC Country Line First in 10 list. Let's talk about the Alabama Crimson Tide. And Alabama, I think admittedly, although Saban didn't admit this publicly, Alabama had a bit of a soft close in December. I don't know it was a great job by Alabama recruiting back in December, but it could be a strong finish tomorrow. According to Tommy Luganbill, who covers recruiting for ESPN, Alabama could be in the top 3 by the time the day is all said and done. Now, Luganbill's numbers here reference the ESPN rankings, but if it's true for ESPN, it's at least close to true for Rivals and 24/7. What Luganbill says is they, meaning Alabama, would love to get an offensive tackle, they'd love to get a wide out, would love to get a corner. If they were to nail all 3 of those, they're in the top 3 in my mind at the end of Wednesday. So it's going to be interesting to see what takes place. First of all, twofold here. You agree that cornerback, that wide receiver, offensive tackle, are those, as you view it, Alabama's biggest needs here going into tomorrow? And could Alabama possibly sweep the board with a big-time addition in all 3 of those spots?
Yeah, I don't know that, to me, offensive tackle, to me, is not that big a deal. I think when you look at what they've got coming back in Jedrick Wills and Alex Leatherwood, a couple of guys who were true freshmen last year, I think for the next couple of years at least, they're in a good position as far as offensive tackle goes. But there is no secret. Alabama has to sign guys in the secondary, and they have to be guys that can almost play right away. We talked about Isaac Taylor-Stewart. Tyson Campbell's getting a late push. Patrick Surtain, a lot of Bama fans are starting to think that he can make the flip from being an LSU lean to being an Alabama lean. And then you have Eddie Smith, who's Devontae's cousin. A lot of people think that he's going to wind up at Alabama as well. So I think out of those guys, I'm hoping they get 2. I think it's maybe Eddie Smith, Isaac Taylor-Stewart. But they have to sign those corners, in my opinion, if they're going to get this class to where they need to be. To me, it's not even about Alabama's ranking in this cycle. to me, it's about, like Tom Luganbill said, where they are signing these specific players.
Well, and I think it's interesting when you look at the offensive tackle position. You say maybe not the biggest need, but this may be more of the opportunity. You know, Alabama has a chance to impress Nicholas Petit-Frere.
Yeah.
He visits Ohio State this past weekend. He's close to Greg Schiano. Schiano's probably leaving to go to the New England Patriots.
Yeah.
Maybe that means that all of a sudden Petit-Frere is not as interested in Ohio State anymore. He may also be a Florida lean right now. So it's the opportunity with Petit-Frere, but it's also, I think, maybe a bit of a concern when it comes to that cornerback position. You talk about Eddie Smith. That would seem to be a guy that Alabama has a strong relationship with, but maybe not Tyson Campbell. I think definitely not Isaac Taylor Stewart. I think Alabama's essentially announced that he's not coming in their direction, although they can't officially comment on it.
Right.
Patrick Surtain, we'll talk about him later on the show. The LSU folks will tell you that he's all Tiger. Alabama may be holding out some hope here. What happens if Alabama doesn't get one of those 5-star guys?
Yeah, it's going to be a letdown because if you remember, and Alabama fans will remember this last year, Nick Saban said last year's cornerback class was a letdown. They had to find guys with length. They had to find guys with speed. And so I think you've seen here recently, they are starting to throw out some of these offers to some of these guys. And I will say this about Nick Saban and Alabama and what has been the recruiting machine. I don't know that Nick Saban is a big fan of all these guys having been signed, because what you have here is that first wave of guys come through, and Nick Saban, where he normally would have rebounded at the end when he starts getting these no's from some kids at the end of January, he hasn't been able to do that because a lot of these quality players have already signed on the dotted line with other schools. It hasn't allowed for the second wave of offers to kind of get out from some of the top schools, specifically Alabama. So I think if they don't close with one of those big corners, I think it's going to be a tough way to kind of spin the recruiting cycle that it was a good run for Alabama.
Maurice Carter says he doesn't think Isaac Taylor Stewart's going to Alabama. He thinks he's USC bound. Yeah, Alabama's already started the process of leaking the off-field concerns and things like that. That's when you know a kid's not going to Alabama.
Come on. Nobody's heard that. Don't even start that with me today. No. I'm not hearing that.
Alabama is very good about letting you know the reasons why guys are not coming there.
Guess what? It'll happen at Georgia. There's a place, but Kirby Smart's been trained on that sort of thing. Sure.
But by the way, Michael Collum likes my hoodie. Somebody else kind of mentioned, what do you think about the hooded sweatshirt for me today? This comes from our friends at Tailgate Apparel. Great.
Got some old school swag to it.
A little bit of old school, yeah. I feel very, very, I don't know, very enveloped in cotton here.
Yeah, I like it, man. It definitely got a little old school swag, so it's got a little throwback.
Yeah, so I appreciate y'all kind of noticing in the comment section. Somebody else had said the same thing a little earlier, so I kind of appreciate the shout on that. Hashim Spikes also kind of weighing in on the hoodie. I appreciate that. So we'll see how this recruiting goes for Alabama and Georgia. Another team kind of in the mix here for what might be a big day on signing day is the Florida Gators. We'll make them the subject of item number 3 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And obviously they talk about Florida recruiting a lot on the SEC Country Florida podcast. Nobody knows that subject better than our colleague Zach Albalverdi from down there in Gainesville. And Zach sort of weighed in this week about how he thinks Florida might close and what his impressions are of Dan Mullen and the work that he's done with the Gators in his first recruiting cycle on the job there at Florida. Here is Zach Albalverdi on that.
When you think back on the January contact period and each in-home visit that he made, that recruit then in turn came and gave the Gators an official visit, and he got them on campus and had a chance to land their commitment. And we saw the same thing pretty much with the early signing period. So that's been the most impressive thing, is that he has set the stage. He's got the Gators, he's got their foot in the door with the prospects that matter, with the prospects that they needed to be in contention for. And now the Gators have a chance to fill out their 2018 class pretty nicely here.
So he says the Gators will fill out their 2018 class pretty nicely. For me, that means names like Jacob Copeland. We talk about Nicholas Petit-Frere. That's a big one for Florida here coming down to the wire. There are other names we could discuss. I know that Jacob Copeland's been very busy on social media, talking about how torn he is about his decision and how pained he is about having less than a day to go before he has to make his announcement. I think he's having a good time with everybody on this in social media. I don't fault him for that. I don't fault him for kind of playing up the drama on his Twitter feed. I'm sure it is a lot of fun for him. But Copeland, Petit-Frere, those are some of the names here that make it a big finish for Florida.
Yeah, definitely. I've got Noah Boykin, also a 4-star DB. You're going to see guys like Andrew Chatfield.
Yeah, Chatfield's a big one too.
Richard Gurage. I'm not sure how you say his name too, but those are guys that I think that Florida's actually expecting. I don't know that Petit-Frere lands down there. I don't think he lands at Alabama either. I think he does end up looking up north to maybe a place like Ohio State or Notre Dame. I know he's had a strong Notre Dame kind of lean to him here recently. So I think that Florida maybe loses out on him. But I still think Jacob Copeland signs at Florida. I still think you get the two guys I just mentioned. Justin Watkins is a commit down there. I think that class, to me, rounding out, I got to say, that And we've gone back and forth about this. That's a strong close for me in Dan Mullen's eyes for his first class.
Yeah, if you get some of these big guys, if you get a Copeland back into the fold after he's at one point in time a commit, I'm going to give you credit for that. And I like what Rick Keene says in the comment section. It says Florida fans have high expectations. We're a historic school right in the middle of one, if not the best recruiting beds in the country. Any good coach could recruit the University of Florida. At the end of the day, that's why Coach Mack is gone. The truth is, I 100% agree with Rick Keene on that. That is why McElwain's not here, and it's one of the things I'm going to compare McElwain to Mullen on. McElwain finished outside the top 20 in his first year in 2015. Mullen's not going to do that, but the other thing that McElwain never did was he never had a top 10 class. If Mullen could find a way to attract enough talent here tomorrow to get into the top 10, now you may say that's an arbitrary designation, but the truth is it's the kind of thing that McElwain didn't do, and as the commenter just mentioned, that's one of the reasons why he's not here. If Mullen could get into the top 10, for me that is an emphatic statement. This is not the McElwain era anymore, that Florida truly is starting the process of turning the corner.
Yeah, and it's not only about the guys they're going to sign or how many stars they're going to have. I mean, we're looking at a guy like Jacob Copeland, who Alabama wants. We're looking at a guy, and Caleb Tanner, that's the name I didn't even bring up a minute ago. Caleb Tanner was all Auburn, until like last week, and now it's,
one-time UGA commit.
Yeah, and now this, this looks to be a heavy Florida lean. So it's not just to me about the stars they're getting down there. Dan Mullen has gone into some of the, the backyards of some of the other recruiting powerhouses and has been able to get some of these guys signed on the dotted line down there in year one at Florida. I just think he's starting to turn some heads, and my head's one of them.
We're talking about the Gators class here. Chad Clark, who's a Georgia fan, says, hey, you can't use the word Gators and class together in the same sentence.
Jeez. Well, y'all, it's going to be quite the day tomorrow.
Stephen Mills says Dan Mullen folds under pressure. Won't be good for Gators versus Georgia. Jerome Nottingham says, whatever. Florida's irrelevant. No need to waste my time talking about garbage. And listen, I mean, I think even the Florida fans would admit that in 2017, Florida did become irrelevant. They became the kind of team that had very little in the way of talent, very little in the way of striking fear in the hearts of any opponents. I mean, part of what Dan Mullen's doing here, and I say this as a guy with a Georgia sweatshirt on, but part of what Mullen has done here, which I think has been good, is he started the process with the only thing you can do in January, which is talk. He has talked. He's talked up. Hey, we're about national championships. We're not about divisions. He has said the right things, and tomorrow gets a chance to sort of take that step towards relevancy. The critics of Florida, the rivals of Florida who say, hey, you became irrelevant under Jim McElwain, they're not wrong. But they may be wrong if they assume that Dan Mullen's going to sort of maintain Florida at that same level.
Well, irrelevant's a big word, though. I mean, irrelevant's a big word when you talk about a team who 2 years under Jim McElwain did go to back-to-back SEC title games. So if you are another team out there calling Florida irrelevant under Jim McElwain, let's just slow down.
But hold on now.
Recruiting-wise, yes.
They weren't a real threat to win the SEC.
No.
They did win the division 2 years in a row, which was a bad SEC East.
Right.
And what I said was they became irrelevant. They sort of slipped from where they were in 2015, 2016 to what they were in 2017. And by the latter half of 2017, nobody was afraid of playing Florida anymore.
No,
nobody feared playing
I agree
Florida.
with you. My only point is that under Jim McElwain, if your team wasn't going to the conference championship game, it's kind of hard to throw those darts out there and say, irrelevancy if Florida's making their way to the title game. I will say this, though, and I think this is the blueprint that they all had, and Scott Strickland was, at the forefront of this. When it was talked about, Dan Mullen, good hire, bad hire, you knew that Dan Mullen had the blueprint to be a national championship contender because he's seen it at Florida. He knows Gainesville, and I think that it's been a perfect fit because he has done that. Everything you thought you might get at a Dan Mullen of saying, hey, I know how to win here, hey, I know the recruiting background here, hey, I can turn this program back around. He has put that into play in the last couple of months.
Bo Molinari brings up an interesting point. Willie Taggart, the Florida State coach, who we really hammered after December. That was a bad run. They stand to a really close strong tomorrow, and all of a sudden, that's going to be one of those interesting things to sort of look at side by side. Florida kind of climbing the rankings here, maybe, but Florida State kind of climbing them too. Does Florida State get to claim in-state supremacy there? That could be an interesting one for Dan Mullen.
Boy, that's going to be interesting. And you talk about, that's a rivalry that I grew up watching. Florida State down in Florida. That was a big deal, and that rivalry didn't have the luster this past year. And so when you talk about recruiting and you talk about two new head coaches and both these guys trying to climb back to relevancy, the big word we were just talking about, I did not think that Florida State would be able to pull off what it has here recently. And so I think a strong close from them you have to start looking at, if you're a Florida fan, that Willie Taggart's doing some good things.
Another country heard from here, Michael Clyburn, who's a Mississippi State fan. We were talking about big talk from Dan Mullen earlier. Michael says all Mullen can do is talk. So the Mississippi State fan's still a little salty about his departure there from Stark Vegas, but nonetheless, we'll keep talking about this in our comment section here today on SEC Country Live. For now, though, let's move on to item number 4 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10. And briefly, I don't know if you even remember this, but on yesterday's show, for a brief moment, we discussed the big momentum that Jimbo Fisher has for his 2019 class there at Texas A&M. They've already secured a lot of big-time commitments. They just got one this week, though, from a huge target for the class of 2018. The kind of guy, and I love how you said this before, sometimes it's about more than just your star ranking. It's about who did you beat out to get this guy. Leon O'Neal, the safety, was on everybody's list here at the end. Alabama pursuing him, Georgia pursuing him, Tennessee pursuing him. Well, Leon O'Neal, in a very cool commitment video, has made his choice known, and it's going to be the Texas A&M Aggies. Now, I want to show you some of this. First of all, O'Neal did something in a commitment video that I've never seen. I wasn't aware of this. I guess he's got a little bit of trouble in his background. Maybe he was kind of got caught up in a car theft attempt gone wrong a couple years ago. He actually uses that in his commitment video. And this actually, when I describe this to you, that sounds kind of rough, right? Yeah. But it actually comes across pretty strong and pretty well done. Here's a little bit from Leon O'Neal's commitment video where he chose the Aggies. All right, so here he is. Like, this is like a reenactment. This is not an actual Grand Theft Auto here. This is not a video game. So in a minute, he's going to start telling his story here of kind of how he got there for that.
At the age of 15, I made the biggest mistake of my life.
And as Michael, our producer, one of our producers said, O'Neal's actually a pretty good actor here. You're going to see some pretty good acting from him in a moment. I love...
Who produces these videos,
it's
man?
It's like a movie.
Yeah, it is. It's like a movie trailer, honestly.
All right, so he kind of tells the story about how that's kind of like the thing that he didn't want to do, and kind of coming back from this, and it actually then goes to him like working out in the gym. We've seen that from commitment videos a lot, and then at the end, what the Aggies fans care about is the moment when he lets the world know kind of where he's going and kind of what he's learned from some of the mistakes that he's made in the past. Let me pick up and catch a little more here of the Leon O'Neal video and the money moment if you're a Texas A&M fan.
I learned if I can do it, anybody can do it. We can all change. We can all wake them up. Never stop believing. It's all day, man. I say I'm bluffing, interrupt your formal introduction, but I was born to win.
All right, he's going to show the Aggies here in a moment. Those are some of the letters he's received as a recruit. That's obviously something they get a lot of. UCLA getting thrown to the ground there, by the way. And then he shows the A&M gloves. And Leon O'Neal, who, I had folks who were at the U.S. Army All-American game in San Antonio said that O'Neal was one of the top performers that entire week.
Yeah.
This is, and I don't say this lightly because I watch all these things, that's a great commitment video.
No, it is.
That's one of the best, most well-produced ones we've seen.
Yeah, it blows my mind the production value you get out of some of these things. And I'll be honest, when you first started saying that, I was really worried about what we were going to get.
Because
yeah,
I was too.
Yeah, no. Have you seen the Washington State lineman that got like the Community Service Award, and everybody was like holding him in high esteem, but it turns out it's because he got arrested and sentenced to like 200 hours of community service. It was like that's what I was like hoping we were not going to get out of this video, and it wasn't. It wasn't. Well, it turned out to be a great video, but the production value is very good.
I'll admit this, and I shouldn't even probably say this, but when I first saw the video, I thought that the stealing the car was a metaphor for something. Right. Like, the way I'm stealing this car, I'm going to be stealing hearts in the SEC. I thought we were going down like some sort of negative metaphor or whatever. Yeah. Come to find out, it's like, hey, this is in my past. This happened. I've learned from it. Now I'm ready to do big things at Texas A&M. I think it's a really cool video. I think O'Neal's doing a good job telling his story there. Yeah. And, boy, I think that for the Aggies, Jimbo Fisher, man, he's already showing you a national championship coach, national championship pedigree. He completely quit on Florida State, but he's re-energized here. And I can't say it enough.
No, he
this guy, like a dog, quit on Florida State.
He did.
But he's working hard for Texas A&M.
Yeah, and Leon O'Neal is going to be the jewel of the class. You mentioned it. There was a lot of guys after this guy. This is a guy, this is not like somebody that, Alabama had an offer out for. Dabo Swinney was at his house last week. Nick Saban was at his house last week. There's a lot of people wanted this guy. And along with Jalen Jalen Preston, he's going to be the jewel of this class. There's no doubt about it. You also look at a guy like Vernon Jackson, who's been an Alabama commit for quite some while now.
That's a guy, yeah.
He could flip to Texas A&M this week, and to me, I think that he might be a Texas A&M lean. They've been going after Bobby Brown. I don't know that he winds up at Texas A&M himself, but it kind of goes along the same thing we've been talking about, where Jimbo is starting to dip into some of the backyards of some of these guys around the Southeast, and he's ruffling some feathers and getting guys like Leon O'Neal.
Trey Duke says Jimbo Fisher's going to have Texas A&M rolling. I kind of agree with that. Joel Anthony Dean says, not to mention, they got the #1 overall class for 2019.
Yep.
That may very well be true. I haven't checked the 2019 rankings in a while. I know they've added a lot of commits. Obviously, a lot to feel good about right here if you're a Texas A&M fan, and I think this is like a 2 or 3 year proposition here. I mean, I think you've seen, Kirby Smart, Nick Saban, Urban Meyer, some of the recent successful coaches in the SEC. That first year involved a little growing pains. In year 2, you showed some real strides. I think the same thing is probably true for Jimbo, even though he's an experienced head coach. There may be some issues. It may be a someone-esque 7 or 8 win season here in 2018. But batten down the hatches for 2019.
No, I agree. And it's also, to me, a message to anybody that's kind of in that range of people you're going to be recruiting against. And I got to say this. I mean, I think LSU does need to close strong tomorrow. I don't think LSU and Ed Orgeron can afford to lose out on Patrick Surtain or Jamar Chase or some of the other people, because you look at Texas A&M, that, obviously they're going to close decently strong. It's not going to be a great class Texas A&M, but when you do look ahead to 2019, you do feel like Jimbo Fisher is going to make a lot of waves with some of these guys.
Jeremy Pettis, who's an Alabama fan, says his next video is going to be him learning that he's going to take an L every year versus Alabama yearly. Now, Jeremy's having some fun with that, but I'm going to turn this into a serious question for you. Let's give Leon 4 years at A&M. He go 0 for 4 against Alabama?
Boy, that's
I'm
tough.
going to put you on the spot.
Well,
I'm not even asking about O'Neal's career. I'm asking about
A&M
versus Alabama for the next 4 years.
Yeah, I'm going to say he gets one.
And I think A&M's going to beat Alabama at least once in the next 4 years.
Once in the next 4 years, I can see it. Because I've always told you on the show, it's never the ones like the big openers or the Iron Bowl. Those aren't the games that really worry me for Alabama. It's always the ones in between. Texas A&M jumps up and gets you. Ole Miss jumps up and gets you. LSU
Here's where I think you're wrong, though. And I may be wrong, and if I am, we'll say this in the years ahead. I think that Jimbo Fisher is going to move Texas A&M into the other group. That you say, hey, the ones that trip up Alabama are that sort of like middle tier SEC team. I don't think A&M's an Ole Miss tier anymore. I think A&M is going to be right there alongside an Auburn or LSU in that tier that's trying to compete with Alabama. And you know what? If I'm an Auburn fan or if I'm an LSU fan, I'm a little bit nervous right now that A&M might sort of push me out of some of my real estate that I enjoy.
That's fair enough. And I think, listen, if you'd have said the next 2 years, I'd have said there's no way. I don't think Jimbo Fisher's going to get it going that fast.
I'm going to give you 4 years
Given four, I would have to lean towards the field. It's kind of the field we've been taking. I'd have to lean towards Jimbo might get one over Alabama in that time span.
All right, let's talk about item number 5 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And I'm 40. I'm going to be 41 here in a few weeks. So Shane Matthews, the former Florida quarterback, is a name that means a lot to me. And you're a decade younger than me. I mean, how well do you remember Shane Matthews at Florida?
I remember Shane Matthews because of all the E60s or whatever that have been done on Alabama-Florida games from the 90s. That's what Shane Matthews means to me.
So here is, I think, the best way to describe Shane Matthews for a lot of our younger viewers who may not be, or if you're a listener on the podcast, you may not be that aware of who he is. This was Steve Spurrier's first great quarterback at Florida. The guy that predated like Danny Werfel, for instance, was Shane Matthews. A huge deal at Florida. And now, apparently, he's going to prison, I guess. We got a couple screen grabs I want to show you here. First of all, the details on this as reported by an outlet that covers the Florida Gators. Let me show you that on kind of where Matthews is headed here in terms of the next couple months. This is Kevin Brockway, who I believe works for the Gainesville Sun, I believe. He says, per terms of the plea agreement, former Gator quarterback Shane Matthews has until June to start a 3-month prison sentence. He's going to have to pay $439,000 in restitution for involvement in with Monty Groves, a former Florida player, in a Monty Grove Medicare fraud scam. Now, Matthews himself has sort of responded to this on Twitter, not his own Twitter account, but Andy Staples from SI.com. He got a statement from him. This is kind of long. I'm going to see if I can sort of go through a lot of this. He says in early 2015, Shane Matthews says, I was contacted by my former teammate and friend Monty Grove regarding a position with his company, blah, 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 blah. Unsuspecting, he says, I worked for that company for a short period of time. job offered me some flexibility. Then in the spring of 2016, I was approached by authorities, informed that this was a fraudulent operation. He goes on to say, and by the way, I'm just sort of going through a lot of this, he regrets getting involved with his business, accepts full responsibility. So essentially says, hey, I took this as a part-time job, didn't know it was a fraud, now I take full responsibility.
Yeah.
What do you make of this story?
Boy,
I mean, first of all, could you do 3 months?
There's a lot
of 3 months. I could not.
There's a lot of layers.
I had a better chance of paying the $439K than I would doing the 3 months.
Yeah, there's a lot of layers there, and there is a part of me that says, well, you know what, you need to look into things like that. But there's a huge part of me that feels bad for him. I got to be honest. Like, there's a part of me that's, listen, and he's taking responsibility. You're paying all this stuff back, but there's a part of me that looks at it and goes, I've had job offers from teammates. There's no telling what some people are getting into. You look at, some of the schemes that have gone on around this country for the last few years. It would be easy, in my opinion, and we've talked about this before, it would be easy to fall into a trap like this because, somebody's like, hey, invest in this or invest in that or, put some money here or come to work for my company and come to find out it's a pyramid scheme. It's a huge Medicare fraud scam, and he just, fell down this slippery slope, and all of a sudden he's got to do 3 months in jail.
Yeah. I kind of want to make fun of him because he's a former Florida quarterback, I will admit that, but there is a part of me that, and you and I have talked about this, both on air and off, of would we know we were doing the wrong thing and sort of stumbled into it? It's like, if somebody says, hey, it's a part-time job, and it's like these spam things that show up in our comment section sometimes of, hey, I'm making $5,000 a week working from home. Like, if you really did stumble into one of those, would we be wise enough to know that something about this doesn't quite seem right? I mean, I feel like it's probably a little easier to get sort of tripped up by this than maybe we realize. Although there is another part of me that wants to say, come on, I mean, did you not do any vetting whatsoever?
Yeah, that's it's like there's a piece of me that's like, you know what, you have to take responsibility. This is a decision you made. But there's a huge part of me that looks at myself and the opportunities that have been laid out in front of me and some of the teammates that I've had, and I look at it and say, man, that just, you get 20 years down the road from your college career, and all of a sudden you look back and you have all these teammates and all these connections, especially for a Florida quarterback, and there's just no telling like how this actually came to fruition. I just think it stinks for him, but good for him for fessing up to it, and he's going to go do his time.
How do you think? By the way, Joel Anthony Dean says me in jail would be hilarious. How do you think my hooded sweatshirt would go over in prison? How you think? Hey guys, how you doing?
Hey man, how's it going? You'd be doing.
Where the cool kids hang out?
You'd be doing a Dog Nation show in front of the entire prison system by the end of that jail term for sure.
Yeah, I don't think I make 3 minutes. I don't think I can make 3 minutes.
Man. 3 months in jail.
Might have to get all like sleeved up.
It is funny that they give him like a he gets a report between like now and July. You know what I mean? Like it's like, hey, you show up when you need to between now and July, and we'll figure it out from there.
Yeah, I'd be going the last possible day. Yeah. Last possible day. So I hate it for him. I mean, it's tough. It's a name that if you're my age, you know him a lot. And listen, 3 months. I mean, I'm assuming he'll bounce back and be fine. So we'll see how it goes. It is a tough situation.
It's tough.
Item number 6 on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. Back to a much more, sort of football-centric subject. So Tennessee is holding on to a commitment from 4-star linebacker J.J. Peterson. The trick, what are you laughing about now? I'm trying to get back on track, and now you're screwing everything up.
I know, these comments in the comment section, I can't even read some of them right now. They're so funny.
Yeah, come on. Some of y'all are taking this.
Cliff said, BA with the tattoo sleeve. Yeah, I'd be all about that. You'd probably come out a different person if you went to prison. Come out, you'd have like some.
I think one of the things that I was laughing about a moment ago is, and I'll take this like 2 seconds and then we'll get back on track here, but it sort of sounds like the plot of a movie, right?
Yeah.
Former quarterback, business-minded type guy, falls into the wrong type of thing, does 3 months in prison, never the same guy again after that.
There's like a Will Ferrell and Kevin Hart movie. I can't even remember the name of it, but it came out like a year or two ago.
Yeah,
that's exactly right.
That's kind of what I was thinking. Anyway, back to item number 6 here, talking about recruiting. So the biggest coup, I think, of all for Jeremy Pruitt since he became Tennessee coach was the commitment from J.J. Peterson, the big-time pass rusher. He's down from a little county called Colquitt County in southwest Georgia. It's a power program here in the state of Georgia where Mike and I both live. Peterson was at long time thought to be an Alabama lean, but committed to Tennessee because of the relationship he had with Jeremy Pruitt. The only problem with that Tennessee commitment was he had never visited there. This was all about the relationship with the coach. It was not about any sort of connection to the university. He'd never even seen it. He'd only probably seen it on TV or in pictures. Well, as you might imagine, that commitment, is that bond strong enough to hold through National Signing Day? Alabama hopes not. The Birmingham News, AL.com, reporting that the Tigers trying to do everything they can, or I should say the Crimson Tide trying to do everything it can to flip J.J. Peterson. You're getting a quote from Colquitt County's coach, Rush Probst. You may remember him from the old Hoover two-a-day show on MTV years ago. Probst says Alabama's made a very strong push here. I don't think either one, Alabama or Tennessee, is a clear favorite as of Sunday afternoon. I think it's a dead heat right now, 50-50. If you're a Tennessee fan, this is your big commitment, at least for right now. How nervous are you that Alabama sort of brought it back, at least according to Probst, who would know, seemingly, brought it back even to 50-50? Does it make you nervous?
I think that you got to be nervous as a Tennessee fan. And I'm going to go out and I'm going to actually call that statement alone a win for Alabama, because this is J.J. Peterson who said before the All-American game, hey, if I had a hat right now, if I had a Tennessee hat sitting in front of me, I'd put it on and commit to Tennessee right now. That's how strongly he felt about Jeremy Pruitt. So the fact that Rush Probst, who is obviously very close to Jeremy Pruitt as well, comes out and says 50-50, I have to take that as a little bit of an Alabama lead. Now, I'll be shocked if J.J. Peterson winds up at Alabama. It's just everything's been steering away from J.J. Peterson being at Alabama. He kind of goes in that Quay Walker vibe of guys that are kind of on the fringe at Tennessee that you feel like might end up at Tennessee, but you're not really sure. But J.J. Peterson, to me, if he winds up at Alabama, I think that's a big win for Alabama. And I think that's a huge loss for Tennessee all in the same breath.
Yeah, and in the comment section, Scott Remmer says that Knoxville's way better than Tuscaloosa. The problem here is, for Tennessee, when it comes to J.J. Peterson, maybe with a lot of other guys on Wednesday, it's sort of hard to get the fair side-by-side comparison, right? Because Alabama has been number one in recruiting over and over again, won the national championship, been a fixture in these sort of big-time end-of-season games, college football playoff every year that it's been in existence. Jeremy Pruitt's never coached a game before as a head coach. You can sort of work your way up into the second-place position, but there really are no silver medals when it comes to recruiting. And maybe Tennessee holds on to Peterson. Maybe it gets Quay Walker, a guy we talked about a little earlier. But it could be one of those days tomorrow where Tennessee made it close with Jacob Copeland, ultimately doesn't get him. Made it close with J.J. Peterson, ultimately doesn't get him. He goes back to Alabama, the place we always thought he was going to go. Maybe they even lose out on Quay Walker. They're probably not getting the cornerbacks that have visited recently, like Isaac Taylor-Stewart or Tyson Campbell. This could be one of those things where Tennessee fans are left to say, wow, look at all the five-star guys and high four-star guys that visit our campus, but we didn't get any of them.
Yeah, it's like kind of that close but no cigar type of feeling if you're a Tennessee fan. I think that is a real danger. And I said this last week. I got to give Jeremy Pruitt that in a short amount of time he has gotten some of these guys to visit, but it does feel kind of like an empty trophy to me if none of these guys end up, if not one of the guys, the big recruits that he's gotten, end up signing on the dotted line. Tennessee is one of those teams that could have a path to being to pushing towards the top 15 class, and they could have a path to going really to the back of the pack when you talk about some of the guys that could flip this class around. I'm not sure. I think that Jeremy Pruitt obviously makes a ton of good relationships, but it might be a Jimbo Fisher type of feeling where really 2019 might be what you start to look at. The only difference is Jimbo Fisher, obviously, as we talked about earlier, starts to get Leon O'Neal and starts to make his class this year look that much better. Can Jeremy Pruitt find a jewel for the 2018 class is the question.
Jason Dwayne Greason says, if I went to prison, I'd come back out with a Joe Dirt haircut and a permanent toothpick. You know who Joe Dirt is. You know what that movie is?
Yeah.
Maybe that's the look. Maybe I just got to go like straight, like shave the whole head bald.
I think it's a straight.
I just feel like one way or another, you got to have a lot of tattoos.
Yeah, maybe so. You got to get one like right here too, though. Like you can't just have tattoos anywhere. You got to get one. This one says like I'm down for anything.
So the other day I'm eating in a restaurant and like one of the servers had a neck tattoo. Like how good of a server do you have to be to still get a job if you got a neck tattoo?
Yeah, that's aggressive.
Like you must be like a fan.
Like all the way up to the ear, like right there. Yeah.
Like neck tattoo. I feel like I've also got to lose some of this poundage and sort of like get a little bit more rocked up. I feel like that's just a necessity, right?
Yeah,
you can't be like super doughy in prison.
Yeah, you have to. Yeah, you don't have anything else to do but work out while you're in prison. So.
I mean, if you're Shane Matthews, no pun intended, can you kind of scramble around for 90 days here and just sort of stay out of trouble? I mean, or like
surely he's not going to like a maximum security type of prison, though. I mean, surely it's just like a country club. I would assume.
But how many of those country club prisons really exist, though? I mean, it's not like it's some former NFL guy. This is a guy that played for 30 years ago. The odds are the judge in this case doesn't even know who he is.
He played in the NFL for a while, didn't he? I thought he got a pretty good NFL career.
Maybe so.
He was in there for like 9-10 years, I thought.
Well, you know what? He should have saved his money then instead of getting mixed up with all of this. Stephen Early says, I'm going to come back out from prison with that little tattoo tear down my cheek.
Yeah.
I don't know about that. Somebody else may have one of those tear cheeks because of me. That may be what ended up happening.
His first stop will be at Waffle House when he gets out to go see his side piece, too.
Yeah, that may be true as well.
Check that out.
Item number 7 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. For those of you who've been with us for a long time, you'll get that joke from Mike. If you're newer, that one may not resonate with you. But nonetheless, item number 7 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. So Chad Morris, the Arkansas coach, is in what I believe is a bit of an unenviable position.
Yeah. Trying
to sell something that's probably a little hard to sell, but you at least love the fact that he's kind of going out there and trying to be sort of front and center and showing his face in front of the Arkansas fans. Arkansas releases a video on Twitter where he sort of talks about what he likes with the Arkansas recruiting class, how he thinks it's going to play out, and kind of admitting that they went into this class knowing they weren't going to sign a ton of guys. Here is the way that Morris, the brand new Arkansas coach, tries to sell that fact to Razorback fans. Take a look.
Given the amount of seniors that left, and we knew that there will be attrition throughout the course of the year and the program of guys, where do they fit in the system, but we knew in general that this razor fast 18 class was going to be extremely small. So to be able to go out and target the speed and to really go through the evaluation process and understand that the quality is far more important right now than the quantity. That was our biggest emphasis as we approach this year.
So a couple things there. First of all, we're going with a razor fast. That's, I guess, the new phrase for Chad Morris. You okay with razor fast?
Yeah, why not?
Better than nothing.
They need speed. They need speed. Razor fast. Might as well go ahead and put a label on it.
Yeah, I guess so. I don't mind that. That's okay. But how about the notion of, hey, we didn't sign a lot of guys, but the guys we did sign, they're pretty good. Are we okay with that? I mean, does that work for you?
I don't know.
It's a tough sell for me.
I don't even know, to me, if Arkansas is going to sign. I mean, they're not, I think they had 8 early signees, and I think they've got another 8 commitments right now. And so to me, are you even going to get over 20 right now if you're Chad Morris? So I guess that has to be, obviously, we want the quality. The problem for me is I don't know if the quality comes around. I mean, you've got a couple of guys that you feel like are pretty good. Yeah, I think Bumper Pool's a 4-star type linebacker. A couple other schools were after him, but you look after that. I mean, Miles Mason's a good piece at safety. He's a guy who was a Mississippi State commitment for a long time out of Birmingham. Aaron Brule's a guy who a lot of people think is lean to Arkansas right now. But outside of that, when you start looking
at the one-time UGA commit,
right? You look at Dorian Gerald, who they're targeting. I think he's going to wind up at Florida. You look at a guy like Jalen Moody. I think he's going to wind up at Alabama. So some of the guys they're targeting just to get to some of those quality players. If you come up empty, then all of a sudden it's worried about quality and quantity. Yeah. So I think you have to be careful with that streak.
I think this is the kind of class. I know this is going to sound like I'm getting way ahead of myself here. I don't think Chad Morris is the Arkansas coach in 3 years. You can't skip a year. You just, I just can't even lay it out more in sort of matter of fact than that. You can't skip a year in recruiting. Yeah. And we laid it out. Texas A&M is getting way better, way better. That's a team that Arkansas has been competing with.
Right.
That's what Arkansas sort of considers a rival. They play in, Jerry World every year, something like that? Yeah. I mean, they think of themselves as a rival. Texas A&M's coach is Jimbo Fisher. Jimbo Fisher's getting big-time 4- and 5-star names. Arkansas is trying to tell me that the guys they got are better than you think. I think that Arkansas is dangerously close to really just slipping. They're the worst team in the SEC for 2018, for sure. They are just dangerously close to sort of establishing some roots at the cellar of this league.
Yeah, it just,
the
to
cellar,
me,
I always get the
and I'm glad you
cellar that's the bottom, right?
The bottom cellar.
Yeah, I always get that part confused.
Yeah, I think, and I'm glad you come out and say it because obviously I'm trying to be positive about their class, but it does. I mean, it feels awful empty for Chad Morris, and it's like you look at you're talking about the number 14 class in the SEC, and I think they're right at like number 60 right now in terms of nationally. So I mean, you're getting beat in the SEC by teams that traditionally Arkansas should be better than on the recruiting trail. I mean, if you're Arkansas, you should probably beat Kentucky and Vanderbilt in recruiting a lot of those years. Just not happening. And you would think a splash, you feel like a pretty good hire in Chad Morris would be able to bring some of those recruits on board. It just hasn't happened. I mean, there's no other way to spin what Chad Morris is doing. He can talk about quality and quantity, but right now I don't know if you're getting much of either.
Jeremy Pettis says that the Medicare fraud is a federal crime for Shane Matthews. Stephen A. Miller says he's going to a maximum security prison.
Boy, that's
maximum security prison.
Yeah, that just makes me feel for him even more, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I hate it for him for sure. Item number 8 here on our SEC Country Line First and 10 list. We mentioned this briefly yesterday. I wanted to spend a little bit more time on it, though. The notion that Tennessee, apparently one of the decisions for new coach Jeremy Pruitt is going to do away with something that became, I think, relatively popular during the Butch Jones era, and that's the alternate gray uniforms the Vols sometimes wore. There's actually a radio station, Fox Sports Radio in Knoxville, that had this first. It says Tennessee is going to stop wearing its smoky gray jerseys during football games, stick to the traditional orange and white, all orange and all white combinations. Sources close to the program told Fox Sports Knoxville the Vols will also only wear black cleats. If you're curious about what color shoes Tennessee was going to wear next year, we now know that's going to be the black cleats. What do you think about no gray uniforms for Tennessee anymore?
Boy, I got to tell you, I'm a big fan.
Okay.
I'm a big fan. And we've talked about uniforms, and obviously with the build-up of the season, we'll go down this road again, and we'll start talking about alternates and people launching uniforms and videos. But this has Jeremy Pruitt written all over it for me. Now, I will say this. Now, I don't like the fact that they're not going to be wearing white cleats anymore. I mean, white cleats, to me, that's Tennessee. That's a good look. I think that, kind of goes underneath like the Oakland A's where like the white cleats.
They
kind
do
of
wear
a
the white,
classic-looking feel to it. But the smoky grays to me were just, it was an inflated, empty kind of notion of, hey, let's get people sparked up and get people excited about this football game. I don't think it ever really had a good turnout when you wear the smoky grays. And to me, Tennessee is just one of those brands that feels classic. I mean, just you feel classic when you're in a place like Knoxville and you're playing in Neyland Stadium and you're matching up with some of these teams against Alabama and Georgia and Florida. That you don't need these gimmicks if you're Tennessee. To me, it feels so dry. Tennessee should hold themselves to a higher standard. I think that's what Jeremy Pruitt's trying to get back to.
I also think that the most overrated thing in the world is this notion of, well, you got to do smoky gray uniforms because that's what recruits like. If that was true, then Alabama wouldn't get recruits because they don't do any of that jersey stuff. They don't have any alternate uniforms. Recruits every year asked to fill out surveys. Alabama sort of finishes first in terms of the ugliest uniform list every single year, and Alabama still gets all the recruits. Georgia didn't wear an alternate uniform in 2017, and they're going to get the #1 class in 2018. It is the most overblown thing in the world that recruits want to go play at places where they have alternate uniforms. I'm not telling you it's a negative for recruits, but it's certainly not the positive that's sort of made out to be. You know who likes alternate uniforms? Nike and Under Armour and Adidas, these programs that, and Michael, our producer, raises his hand because he's a young guy.
Of course he does.
But the apparel companies like the alternate uniforms, there's more apparel they get to make and more apparel they get to sell.
They get to sell.
But it's not the impact on recruiting that people think
It's really not. And I can't hammer that home enough. Recruits like facilities. They like relationship with coaches. They like winning programs. They like being successful. They like getting to the NFL. I've never seen a recruit make or break a decision based on what an alternate uniform is. And maybe other than Oregon. I think Oregon gets a lot of that benefit because they have that aura around their uniforms. But a place like Tennessee, it's like I said, to me, Tennessee's always been this classic university with all this history. And to be able to change that, I think was a mistake in the first place.
Oregon, to a certain extent, is the exception that proves the rule because they have sort of built themselves into a program. But here's something to watch for with Oregon. Look at how many teams, or look how many recruits list Oregon as one of the top 5 finalists. Oregon never gets any of those kids.
That's true.
So it's one thing to sort of generate some attention, but it doesn't actually lead to a lot of signatures for Oregon. Can I go back in the past here for something for a couple of minutes ago? Because somebody had a good comment in the comment section. I talked about how if you're Chad Morris at Arkansas, you can't skip a year at recruiting. And right now, Arkansas is the lowest rated class in the SEC. That's essentially what they're doing. Jason Hauver in the comment section says skipping a year in recruiting also doomed Mark Richt. And that is true. You know, Richt had a 2013 class that was sort of dubbed the Dream Team. Ended up not really being that way. A lot of guys left the program, and it was amazing how few of the guys in that 2013 class ended up sticking around Georgia. Trey Matthews, people like that were part of that class. And I think that's right. You know, Richt, had that class not fallen apart the way that it did, who knows if he gets fired in 2015. Now, maybe the results would have been different, but certainly part of the reason why Richt ultimately lost his job at Georgia in 2015 was because of a recruiting class failure from 2013.
Yeah, no, I have to agree with you, and it's just one of those things where there is a floor to what you should be doing in recruiting that will cost you your job. I just don't think you can fall outside of the top 50 as an SEC team, you know, at a place like Arkansas and think, man, 2 years down the road we're gonna have a good squad. It's just not gonna happen. You know, you can go out there, you can try to do it the Mississippi State way they did last year, where you go out and get a lot of JUCO guys at certain points. You find a grad transfer quarterback, but the bottom line is when National Signing Day comes around and you're an SEC team that really has championship aspirations like Arkansas should in the first year under a new head coach, you just can't be as bad as they are. Now you can have that year where it's like, hey, this is a transition year, but Talk about 60 or 65th in the country right now. That is not a good look.
Max McDonald says Tennessee seemed to perform just fine against the Dogs with those smoky grays. I think he's in reference as a Georgia fan talking about how Georgia certainly had some success there in Knoxville this year. So maybe some Georgia fans will be sad to see those things go. We'll have to, I guess, wait and see about
Listen,
that.
And Esteban Esteva says LSU has the best unis and helmets in the SEC. Now, obviously, I'm a Bama guy. I love the tradition. But I will say, I love LSU's uniforms. I love the purple and gold. I love the classic helmets. I hate when they depart from that.
But here's where I'm a hypocrite. I am, look, y'all can tell, I'm sort of an old school guy. I like the teams that have the traditional uniforms, except for LSU. When they wear those purple jerseys with white helmets, that is a hot looking uniform. I do love that uniform.
And I even like the white helmet. Yeah,
LSU is like the one sort of departure from the norm that I think is a really good looking uniform.
Obviously, I'm always going to fall back on the Bama uniforms, but if I have to pick a close runner up, which is tough for me, that LSU is.
You think Alabama would ever wear? I mean, there's so many cool things it could do if it ever decided to do it. I mean, imagine how cool like a Bear Bryant houndstooth like print would look as a helmet.
Yeah. Well, there's been a lot of people that have wanted white helmets or white cleats at Alabama, in the last 10, 15 years.
That's more boring than what they have now.
Well, I mean, it's different. It's different.
But I love the fact that somebody said, let's take the most boring uniform in college football and find a way to make it even more boring.
Yeah. Listen, I love the boredom. I like Bama's uniforms. I like Penn State's uniforms. I like USC's uniform. I like the boring classic. We're going to wear the same things and we're going to come out and be successful.
Shannon Burgess says the white pants with the purple jersey, white helmet is nice. Shannon, for LSU, that is a hot-looking uniform.
I agree.
And maybe it's the uniform that Patrick Surtain Jr. wears for his college career. Let's talk about him and LSU for item number 9 on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And Surtain, maybe like a lot of guys here in the eve before the big decision day tomorrow, still maybe not quite sure what he wants to do. Let me show you the most recent quote I have from Patrick Surtain here. This to SEC Country, who says, it's kind of stressful right now, but it's decision time, so it'll come. I've got an idea, but I've still got to sit down and make the decision. Now, he kind of weighed in on kind of what he liked about LSU, what he liked about Alabama. He was very candid about the differences between the schools here. First of all, do you buy the notion that Surtain doesn't yet know where he wants to go? Because with some recruits like Jacob Copeland, and I don't criticize Copeland for this, I'm just being honest about my opinion, I think Copeland's pulling on our legs. I think he knows where he wants to go. I think a lot of his social media activity is just a way to sort of generate interest in his decision. I don't fault him for that. He can do what he wants to do. Some of the guys that pretend to be undecided aren't actually undecided. Do you think there's a chance that Patrick Surtain Jr. truly is undecided?
I don't know. I would think at this point you have to have a lean. I mean, when all the coaches' visits are done and all the official visits are done and everything's starting to come down to the wire, I can't really believe on a Sunday or Monday night before signing day you don't have a lean. I don't think there's a 50-50 out there for Patrick Surtain. But I was shocked to read Chris Kirshner's column at SECCountry.com that he thinks Surtain's going to Alabama. I mean, he plain out said that I think Nick Saban beats out Ed Orgeron for this, and Surtain winds up at Alabama. I would have to see that with my own eyes to believe it, but I still think that Surtain is wrestling with a ton of stuff. I think he has a lean, but I think there's so many different parts of the decision for him to make that I think he's wrestling with a lot of parts of it and probably isn't completely decided on where he wants to go.
So Cliff Nelson has an interesting take on this. He says Patrick Surtain would have committed to LSU weeks ago if ESPN didn't need ratings for signing day. And while I don't 100% agree with Cliff on that, I don't 0% agree with that as well. That there is something to the TV networks are going to televise this kind of stuff. They do like the idea of uncommitted players. We see this with the recruiting rankings where sometimes I feel like there's a slight bias in favor when they re-rate the prospects. There's a slight bias in favor of the uncommitted prospects. It's just good business to sort of hype up the few remaining names. Do you think that I'll be careful how I ask this because obviously this is just sheer speculation. But is there a chance that the desire to be an uncommitted prospect has sort of talked up Alabama in Surtain's mind?
Yeah, maybe so. Maybe so.
I don't think that's a terrible point.
No, I don't think so either. And I would be. I feel it's hard to say what I'm trying to say right now. But Patrick Surtain, when I look at it, and this is what I was kind of talking about. There's a bunch of different ways that he's being pulled right now. You're getting recruited, and all of these good schools that you feel like are great places to land are talking you up, and everybody's telling you what you want to hear. And it's not only that, but obviously ESPN's doing the same thing. So I feel like Surtain, it would have been cut and dry if all he had to do was show up to LSU and be like, oh, this is a really nice place, I'll go here. But there is that feeling like, listen, I'm getting calls from rivals, I'm getting calls from 247s, I'm getting calls from all these outlets and ESPN. And there is that feeling like, man, I kind of want to be a big deal, and I kind of want this to be a dramatic decision, and I kind of want to leave my own kind of stamp of approval on these epic signing day videos that everybody's been doing.
I think there's also something too as well that when Alabama says we need you, it's sort of hard to say no to that. And listen, every time we've brought up Surtain's name, the LSU folks who watch our show say, Surtain's a Tiger, mark it down, he's coming to LSU, he's been our guy all along. You may very well be right. I won't pretend to know for sure. I don't know if it's LSU or Alabama for Surtain. All I'm saying is my observation from the last few years is Nick Saban and Alabama aren't in a position too often where they truly need someone. When they do, that's a pretty strong pull. It's sort of like, you know, I don't mean to bring politics in this, but, you know, if you're asked by the president to serve your country, it's very hard to say no to that. You know, if you're asked by, you know, Nick Saban, Alabama, to come here and be a guy that meets a need for us, get on the field earlier, because, as you've said before, Alabama's not in this position now where, you know, you have to wait 3 years to play, at least in a position like defensive back for sure. That's a tough pitch to say no to. And it's a tough pitch to counter if you're LSU. It's a tough pitch to counter if you're LSU, but I would argue that LSU historically, when you look at what, you know, the last 10 or 15 years has been an LSU for corners, they might be one of the only teams in the country that can actually counter with, well, you know what? Nick Saban sends a lot of DBs and corners to the NFL, but look at the corners we've sent to the NFL. When you talk about, obviously, the two guys who are leaving early this year, I mean, they have a long history of sending defensive backs to the NFL, so LSU might be one of the only teams that can really pull back against what Nick Saban might be saying. Jason Hauber in the comment section says that I was talking about liking the LSU purple jersey. He says, now we know that BA's wife wears a purple jersey as pajamas. Let me tell you something. We showed you yesterday the picture of my son wearing the New England Patriots gear for the Super Bowl. He can wear that if he wants to. You know, my wife can cheer for any NFL team if she wants to. But if Georgia starts losing, we got to move into a smaller house. Okay, so like there is no like alternate colors for the wife, the children, anything like that. You can be any kind of professional sports fan you want to in my house, but you got to wear the red and black. That's the only college colors we're going to allow. Yeah, red and black is paying the mortgage right now. That's exactly right. Yeah, Adams house. We're going to be having to move to another dwelling place, depending on how all that kind of shakes out. We'll get a couple more comments here as well. Bradley Edwards, to change the subject here for a moment, says, "What about Auburn's class? We haven't talked about Auburn here today. Auburn is sort of a weird team for me right now in that." They are quietly putting together another pretty strong class, but the key word here seems to be kind of quietly, right? I mean, it seems like in his own way, Pruitt at Tennessee's making more noise. Florida's making a little bit more noise. But the Auburn class can be ranked ahead of both those classes. I mean, it's sort of weird. They're going to kind of do it without making a whole lot of fuss about it. Yeah, I mean, we did mention Caleb Tanner earlier, who obviously you feel like could be, you know, a Florida lean in the end. They do have, you know, commitment from Richard Jabuner, who's a good prospect. Yeah, he's a good player. I just, you know, listen, they're kind of humming right along. It's kind of, I guess the reason it doesn't make a lot of headlines is because you have all these first-year coaches, and then you also have, like, the nationally prominent, like, top three, you know, trying to go for top three when you talk about Kirby and Nick Saban. To me, it kind of goes along the lines of, listen, Gus Malzahn's been there for, you know, 5 years. This is kind of right in the neighborhood of what Gus Malzahn's been doing. He's just trucking along, getting these kind of fringe top 10 classes. Here's the other thing that I think sort of hurts Auburn in terms of a conversation starter here before National Signing Day. Auburn signed a lot of really good players back in December. Quindarius Monday, the safety, who I think is going to be an impact player in 2018. Auburn probably won't sign a player tomorrow better than him. Joey Gatewood, who may be a quarterback of the future. Auburn probably doesn't sign a prospect tomorrow better than him. And if you're an Auburn fan, you can correct me if I'm wrong on that. Asa Martin, who we talked about yesterday on the show, as a guy that wants to compete for a starting job next season. I mean, Auburn is probably not going to sign guys tomorrow better than some of the guys that signed back in December when it really sort of laid the foundation for what's going to probably be another top 10 class. And I think another thing to look at, the reason you don't talk a lot about Auburn is because I would argue their biggest target right now is not a guy that's coming out of high school. It might be Calvin Anderson, who's coming from Rice, the offensive tackle, and he's not going to make his decision tomorrow. So that's kind of been a guy you feel like's in the headline. I mean, listen, I think Justin Ross winds up at Alabama. He's right in Auburn's backyard. It's kind of been between Clemson and Auburn and Alabama for a while. I think he winds up at Alabama. Jamar Chase, I think he winds up at LSU. These are all targets to me that there really isn't going to be a ton of drama, I don't feel like. Auburn got into the final two on Chase, but I never took that seriously. On the subject of alternate uniforms, Bobby Pettit mentions the Ole Miss blue jersey that the Rebels occasionally wear. I think Ole Miss got sneaky nice uniforms. I like the
it's
gray
tough.
pants. I like the red. You mentioned the occasional alternate. When I was younger, they wore more of almost like a powder blue.
Yeah, I don't like the powder.
Oh, I like it.
No,
I
I
think
don't like
Ole
the
Miss
powder.
is a nice
I just like
look.
to keep it clean, classic. I mean, I don't like the change-ups that are
You like
going in there.
Kentucky's uniforms?
I like Kentucky's basic uniforms, but they've changed it up too much recently, too. I mean, you've gotten the black jersey, you've gotten
Right.
the chrome helmets. That's too much for me.
Speaking of the Wildcats, they're the subject of item number 10 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. You may not realize, but if you watch the Super Bowl, you know, most of the commercials that you see are the big national $5 million for 30-second ads that, you know, have kind of become famous. But there are those slots. It's typically reserved for like the beginning of the second quarter, for instance, where your local affiliate that you're watching the game on, they get their own ad to sell and their own ads that they can play. Well, in the state of Kentucky, I guess that ad time was bought by the Wildcats football program, and they put a commercial on the air for the Super Bowl. Take a look at this and see if you think it's kind of a cool thing.
Sometimes
This is
life
Benny
isn't fair.
Snell narrating, by the way.
It knocks you down. But you know what I've learned? The will to be great is never comfortable. The preparation it takes is never convenient. To be special,
So it
truly
kind of
special.
goes on like that, you know, kind of good idea. You like the TV commercial, you like the advertisement for Kentucky football. Does this work for you?
This kind of goes in line with me with the same thing about them selling the naming rights to Commonwealth Stadium. All of a sudden it's Kroger Field, and it's like a rebranding effort, if you will, about Kentucky football. It's like, hey, we want to get to where Kentucky basketball is. I just don't know that it ever will, and especially next year. You're talking about a tough road. Boy, their offense is going to be hard to look at.
I think that for almost any other team in the SEC, certainly, you know, programs like Auburn and Alabama, LSU, Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, etc., this would be a total waste of money. Like, you don't need to advertise in your local state for your football team because the football program's already essentially about as popular as it can be. In Kentucky, they may need to try to work. Now, will it be more popular than Kentucky basketball? Probably not. But is there more attention needed for that football program? If you're Mark Stoops, you'd probably say, yeah, I could use a few more eyeballs in my program. And therefore, on the biggest, most watched night of the year on TV, how about we talk a little Kentucky football? Now, I guess there was, did you remember that there was a dead air glitch for a moment?
Yeah.
So that happened all around the country. This impacted the Kentucky commercial when it was put on TV. But nonetheless, it's worth a shot, I guess.
Yeah, and I guess I see where they're coming from. When you look at what's been going on at Louisville for the last few years, I mean, Louisville seemingly pointing in the right direction, football-wise anyways. I mean, you know, you get a Heisman Trophy a couple years ago. That's right down the road. So I don't mind Kentucky trying to rebrand themselves. But it's like you said, I think this would be on empty ears if you did this at most of the other SEC teams.
All right, here on SEC Country Live, you know, we're always looking to close at the show the same way every day. We're always looking for champions of life. And that was true when Butch Jones at Tennessee. Remains true here today. Today, we actually still have a pretty cool one, though. ESPN, who at times can be a little super serious for my taste. Every now and then, though, we'll take a break to kind of make fun of itself a bit and kind of not take itself too seriously. This is a pretty good example of that. This is a tweet about a pretend 30 for 30, a documentary where they, you know, the tagline is always, "What if I told you?" They say, "What if I told you when the confetti fell, it would be thanks to QB2." Reference to a Nick Foles there from the Philadelphia Eagles and Tua Tagovailoa for the Alabama Crimson Tide, year of the backup. It's not a real documentary. They're not making the film, but you know what? Good for ESPN for making fun of itself there a little bit.
Yeah, I guess so. And I love, you know, it's kind of got the star disclaimer down at the bottom.
Yeah.
I think it's a funny look.
I think, though, that it's a little irritating to me that you'd put Foles and Tua in the same sentence, as I think you might agree with me. Foles is not better than Carson Wentz. Wentz just got hurt.
Right.
Tua was always better than Jalen Hurts. It just took a while for it to be appropriate to make that change.
Yeah, it definitely did. But I will say this: I think Nick Foles lands somewhere next year where he's probably a starting quarterback. I would rather, before I went out in the draft and wasted, you know, a number 3 overall pick on somebody in the draft, I would go out and get a Nick Foles that just won a Super Bowl.
All right. Good to have you with us here on SEC Country Live. We appreciate your time. Subscribe to our podcast. It's available for you on iTunes. You can check that out. Also up on SoundCloud as well if you're a SoundCloud user. And share the show with your friends on Facebook. Let them know we're talking about the SEC each and every afternoon here on SEC Country Live. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you tomorrow, 3 p.m. Eastern Time. It's signing day tomorrow. We'll talk about it all and kind of recap everything that's happened when you join us here for SEC Country Live. Have a great day.